Artificial intelligence. What exactly is it, and how does it work, and how does it impact society, good or bad? These are questions people have been asking now for quite a while, and most recently, artificial intelligence has actually become a topic of controversy in pretty much all of our lives in every aspect of it. But what exactly is it, and how does it work? And how does it affect the music industry and the music business? How does it affect composing music? And when you see articles such as Ozzy Osbourne talking about the fact he would sing on a song written or co-written by an artificial intelligence version of Randy Rhoads, what does that mean? I mean, Randy Rhoads has been gone for over 40 years, yet somehow he can write a song? Well, I have a guest here right now with me. His name is Christian Wentz. He is a network systems analyst and actually owns a cybersecurity company, and he has a lot of experience with artificial intelligence as he deals with it as an everyday thing in his job and his business. Christian is also an artist, and he's namely a musician that has toured the world and played with people such as Zach Stevens from Circle to Circle, who also sings in Trans-Siberian Orchestra. And he also plays in a Whitesnake tribute band and is crazy enough to learn all of the guitar parts that John Sykes played on the 1987 album. But Christian has an interesting perspective, and we have an interesting discussion about AI. And this won't be the end of discussions about artificial intelligence, because I have another chat planned for later on in 2024. But with that being said, if you're interested in learning about artificial intelligence, how it works, how it may be applied, what it can do, good or bad in the future, then stay tuned. Here you go. Here's myself and Christian Wentz. Check it out. I'm here with Christian Wentz. Christian, welcome to the show. And we are here to talk about something that a lot of people don't want to talk about in the music world, and that is AI, artificial intelligence. And just so everybody knows, I'm going to give you Christian's background a little bit. He's toured the world as a musician, played with Circle to Circle, recorded with them. He has also been successful at playing in a tribute band, and he was crazy enough to decide to learn all of the guitar parts that John Sykes played on the 1987 album. And on top of every note, and on top of that, the other reason I brought him on, besides being a musician, is that he owns his own company, owns cybersecurity company, and he's a network systems analyst. So he has a really big background in computers. And so combining the musician thing and, you know, having a background with computers, I definitely wanted to bring him on the show to talk about AI, which is something that's been a pretty hot topic over the last year or so. Especially, you got Ozzy talking about, writing a song with an AI Randy Rhoads. You got the Kiss avatars that are out there that, they're making. And this has become, in fact, I've seen AI generated music. I mean, you've seen like Michael Jackson, you've seen people making up songs Jimi Hendrix might have written. And we're going to talk about what's coming, how AI actually works and what it does. And we're going to talk it up. So, Christian, let's talk about AI. What actually is AI, artificial intelligence, and what does it bring to music? Like, how does it actually work?
It's essentially, it depends exactly on which specific technology. Right now we have seen a lot of, I'm sure people have heard of ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. ChatGPT is what we call, it's a generative predictive learning trainer. And essentially what it means is that it takes our inputs and then is able to learn how it is that we speak to and how it is that we communicate. Because essentially it has ChatGPT in particular, as a piece of artificial intelligence or machine learning technology, has access to pretty much every piece of information on the internet that's ever been, some people will say, and I've seen claims that ChatGPT has read the entire internet, billions and billions and billions of pages, and can access it in a nanosecond. But from there, it needs to learn how humans communicate, essentially. So when we put our prompts in, we go to ChatGPT and say, write me a song. that sounds something like Whitesnake's 1987 record about a guy that has lost his daughter and can't find her, and he will never give up. And it will, within a second, it's training. It was listening to the way I said what I was looking for. It listened for a specific subject, a prompt, a syntax, and also a parameter. Mm-hmm. And it takes those things and converts how humans express themselves, and then responds to them in a way that humans would expect to be responded to. Unlike a Google search, which, for example, is just it's basically a big index system. Mm-hmm. You search for Iron Maiden, and it's just going to find keywords and tags that have to do with Iron Maiden, and you'll be able to go read. It'll give you a whole list of things that you can choose to read from. AI is it's almost conversational, and you can have conversations with it if you know how to prompt it. Here's a good example. As you know, I'm also, I'm a history nerd and a philosophy nerd. I asked my GPT bot, which I do use regularly for a number of things, to take the role of Karl Marx in a discussion that I wanted to argue with it about dialectical materialism. It was fascinating, because it responded to me as if it was Karl Marx. It's pretty interesting what it can do. It wasn't very sterile or cold. And of course, because it has indexed and read everything Marx ever wrote and other people's opinions about him, it was able to present itself with the knowledge that Marx would have had. It was interesting. I felt like I won the debate, the discussion that I was having with it. But the point being is that it has the ability to present what it is that we're looking for, mm-hmm. in a way that we would expect another person to present it.
Yeah.
And that includes in things like art and music.
Yeah. It's interesting because, a good example, if somebody's a sci-fi fan, I remember there was a Star Trek: The Next Generation episode where Geordi was arguing with a virtual Albert Einstein about quantum physics. You know what I'm talking about?
I remember that one very well.
Yeah, exactly. When they were stuck in the booby trap. That was the name of the episode. But I remember they not booby trap. No, it was Barkley that was doing it. It was Reginald Barkley, because he had that alien that sort of like did something to his brain. So Geordi went to find him, and he's sitting in there having this huge argument with a virtual Albert Einstein, and it was actually debating with him. So what's basically happening is that is what we have right now. So if you go and you say, hey, I want you to write a song that Jimi Hendrix, in a style of what Jimi Hendrix would have done about a certain topic, it will spit that out.
And it sounds very much like you would expect Jimmy. In fact, you can have some fun with it. One day I asked it to write me a song in the vein of Michael Bublé, like a crooner style.
Yeah.
About a guy who can't get any dates because he smokes and his breath is bad. And it was hilarious. And it sounded just like a crooner would write it too. And it can break it down into verse, chorus. And you can also add refinements to it. You can say, okay, add me a bridge part in this, and you can also tell it to write you the chord chart for what it would sound like, and you can play it against it. Write me give me the notes for the melody. It can do that. It can create melodies for you. And this is, I guess this is a great way to bridge the way it works in terms of music. But I want to address that a month or two ago, I haven't watched The Next Generation in years, the Star Trek that you're referring to. Mm-hmm. And there was a couple of holodeck episodes, and I'm going, see, we have this now. The only thing that's missing is the holograms. But I just got my Oculus 3.
Yeah.
Put this guy on your head and you can step into any holographic world that you want to. And it's really after a while, it's indistinguishable. Your brain just goes, okay, I'm in this space and this is where these physical objects are.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever watched any of the videos of people that forget that they're in a virtual world and like punch their TV when they're trying to or trip over the couch or, whatever, because it becomes so real to them. And this is what I've actually experimented with, having AI write me back beats and things like that. Frankly, I don't want to use it for that, but it is inevitable. And I think we have a lot of people that are very angry about this.
Yeah.
I think that you had mentioned before we went on air here, before we started recording, we were talking about AI being used in Photoshop. It's been a feature of Photoshop for years, but it's even more prominent now. The latest updates include very specific machine learning and AI type features.
Yeah.
Because I use Premiere Pro. I think you use it too, don't you, for video editing?
I do not. No, but the video editing program has. I use Movie Edit Pro. So, but there's a lot of AI functions in that, right? If I say I want the video to have this specific look, and I just punch that in, it comes up. Like
it creates the LUTs and the color grading and stuff for that.
And they have AI functions. For example, I'll give people a little bit of an example. I have, I work mostly with film, okay, and for my photography, and you have to scan film a specific way to make it look the way that it should. So, when I scan a specific film type, I have different settings in there, to make it look like that. Well, now with AI, if I go into, like, say, Adobe Lightroom, and I put a plug in and say Portrait 400, this is what I'm scanning, it'll automatically optimize that program to what Portrait 400 would look like based on what I shot a photo of, based on what the reds should look like. And
exactly.
I was blown away.
That's very useful, isn't it?
Yeah, I was blown away by that. But, and when it comes to music, though, I think that we're going into a trend that a lot of people aren't liking, to where, you're going to have people that might, we have original music right now. We still have a lot of it. I get oversaturated with it. I mean, you see me post about the amount of stuff getting sent to me, but we could be into, we could be heading down a path where original music won't be a thing anymore, because people just go in and say, hey, I want to hear this kind of song and this style of band about this. And then suddenly, the newer artists, they become, obsolete. I mean, I hate to say that, but that's it's like Skynet is replacing musicians, right?
And I think this is the thing that's angering people. I know some, for example, I have a good friend who has a degree in graphic arts who's getting crushed. His business is getting annihilated by AI. To be perfectly honest, I use Midjourney to develop images for different things that I'm doing. But for example, the logos and the branding for my tribute band, I had him do everything. I used AI to generate the idea of what I thought I wanted it to look like, but it still took him to refine it into, he could actually far better interpret what my intentions were and what I wanted out of it. And he was able to present me with things that I didn't know I wanted until I saw it, as an expert in art. You see what I mean? That's the one thing that we have. It hasn't reached a point yet where, based on the limited descriptions that the average person can give it, it doesn't necessarily produce exactly what we're after. So that being the case, I think we're going to find the same thing happening with, I think pop music is actually, here's the funny thing about pop music. Bill Hudson, a few years ago, me and him were talking about songwriting. I've written a lot of songs. I've written a number of records, and it's one of the things that you spend a lot of time learning how to do. It's like songcraft is a real thing.
Yeah. By the way,
he challenged me.
So people know who Bill Hudson is. If you've ever heard of the power metal band North Tail.
And Doro, he plays guitar for Doro off and on. He's also
and Doro, but North Tail is a phenomenal power metal band. So he's one of the guitar players in the band.
And he's a great guitar player, great musician, and a dear friend. I love Billy very much. And he challenged me to write pop songs, and I went, "Oh God, how hard could that be? I can't do it." I even know that the 1-4-6, 1-4-5-6, the chord formulas that they all use, and I still can't do it. I don't have the mind for writing and producing pop. There's a specific thing about it that makes it work, and people underestimate that because it's generally pretty cheesy, and it's generally it's kind of bouncy and predictable. But at the same time, it takes somebody who really understands how to write pop music. I think, unfortunately, and that being said, and this is the irony, is that I think that that AI will be able to write pop music really well, because it can emulate that kind of. It's very specific and pristine pop music. rock and roll music it pushes and it drags in terms of tempo. And that is about an emotion, a connection, the way you play, the way the drummer pushes and pulls the beat, the way a drummer locks in with the bass player, the way a singer is going to oversing or undersing just a little bit here and there to give it this real. Rock and roll is a mess, by the standards of, say, pop music or classical music. Classical music is also very precise. I had a great friend who is a very highly accomplished classical guitarist that loved blues. And when he'd play classical guitar and blow your mind, and then he'd try and play blues, and it sounded like a robot was playing blues. God bless him. I love the guy, but man, he couldn't play blues. So I think that's the problem that AI is going to run into. It can create ideas for you to replicate. And I think that there's, again, much like what you were saying with Photoshop's ability to color grade, change the film style, as far as the way you're scanning it. That can be extremely helpful because generally otherwise it's left up to you to make those adjustments. And and you can still do it too. You can go, well, it gave me something. There's still quite a little bit too much saturation in this spot for me. So you can still adjust it, right? But AI saved you a lot of trouble in terms of initially color grading it. A good example in my own business as a cybersecurity engineer is that I'm constantly programming firewalls and switches. Yeah. If I go to ChatGPT and say, I need a configuration file for Sophos UG 215 firewall that includes 4 different VLANs with these subnets, it'll spit out the script for me in a minute, less than a minute, seconds. And then I could just upload it to the firewall. It used to take me 2 hours to write stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it saves me a lot of time, and I can still bill the same price because it's not hourly. It's about the value of the script, the product. The output is where the value's at. So all of that being said, there are uses for it that can be, they can also drive more creativity.
Yeah.
You can, like I said earlier, the average person that doesn't have a great artistic language doesn't understand light and shade. I certainly don't. You're a great photographer. Your work's amazing. I can't get a picture of like my desktop without my finger in it. And I don't know how to color. I don't know how that stuff works. I don't know what I'm looking for. So for me to go to Midjourney and try and create some art that is going to meet a standard, an industry type standard, a cultural standard, I don't have the language for it. So it's still going to take someone to tell it what to do, even if that person isn't sitting down with a pen or a set of paints.
Yeah.
If somebody wants something specific, they're going to know better. You're still going to need an artist to prompt AI to create the art that you want.
Now, do you think it'll get to a point where you won't need that again?
Yes. And that's where I don't know how far off that is. It's probably not terribly far away. But do I think will it be as specific? No, I think like right now, do you ever use Midjourney to generate images? You can prompt it to imagine this, that, and the other thing. I want a hyper-realistic picture of a dog sitting in a chair smoking a pipe looking out a window with a fishing hat. And it'll generate 4 images for you. And you can go, well, this one's closer to what I want. You can have it reworked out a little bit. So the way I think it would end up working, because it's still, with the language I just used, the prompt that I just used, that isn't going to be enough to get exactly what I wanted out of my head. But then it can generate 500 images. And I can say, well, amalgamate 4 of those, take this out. It can teach you as the person that is prompting it to be more specific about what you want.
Yeah.
Do I think it can do that? Music, especially contemporary music, anything outside of classical or jazz, is going to be actually fairly simple. You can really get, as a musician, you can tell it exactly what you want. You can even dink around with it if you don't have like a musical vocabulary. If you don't know how to create a E7 flat 5 chord, you don't know that's what it sounds like. But you can say, give me some options for chords over top of this pace right here that will work with it and sound what I'm looking for, and it'll create them for you. But ultimately, the performance of it is let's talk about the Kiss Avatar thing and the ABBA. So are you aware of what ABBA's doing with theirs? ABBA's had for the last 18 months their own Avatar type show. I believe they have them in England and Sweden, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong.
Right.
But it's actually using avatars or digitally created images of ABBA on stage. And they use a special system that kind of obfuscates the fact that they are basically LED light board type 3D images.
Sure.
And they are, they're basically synced up to a playback. The band isn't, as far as I know. They might be backstage playing this stuff. I don't think so, though. It'd be too hard to make that work in sync. Because if you're not playing exactly the same thing, you could have a couple of disasters, but it's possible. To be honest, I'm not exactly sure how they make it work. Would I want to go see that? Well, they're making $2 million a show doing it, and they've already paid for the show, and people keep coming. This is what I was arguing with a mutual friend, you know what I'm talking about, that I'm not going to, I don't want to embarrass anybody. Yeah. But my argument with him was, look, all of this comes down to, you can set up a single system that'll do that over and over and over and over and over and over. You can have that show run 20 times, a day if it's a 1 hour show. You know what I mean? It'll run all day.
Yeah.
The people that are involved with it don't get tired because they're not real. Nobody gets tired. Nobody's fingers get tired. And like I said, ABBA's music being in pop has a very specific kind of space that it works in. Mm-hmm. And there are going to be people who are willing to pay for that. And there always will be. That's the thing. I don't think this is going to go away. When you think about raves, what's going to happen to real DJs? We talk a lot about musicians, and to some people, DJs are no different. They get very creative with how they put these records together to create a vibe and push and pull that vibe, bring people up and bring them down. I got a lot of respect for people who are good at that. They're going to be completely obsoleted at some point or another. They won't be necessary. Yeah. That can all be done. You can use AI to sample the mood of a crowd to have the AI then respond to that push and that pull, that rise and that fall. And if you have a digitally created avatar that's up there doing it, are you going to notice the difference when you're smoking dope and taking ecstasy and dancing and stuff? Probably not. Yeah. Also, for the purists, the people that will want to see somebody up there, that generation will disappear. The next generation that's born into it won't really know that there's a big difference, and might even think the idea of having real people do it to be strange. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we have a lot it's a complicated thing. People have a lot of feelings about it. My own feelings about it is, would I pay to see Kiss avatars up there? Absolutely not. It sounds totally ridiculous to me. And I'm a total technophile. Every little gadget in the world I've got here. I play with firewalls and switches and
I would probably,
for a living, that's what I do.
I would probably pay for it if they programmed the Gene and Paul avatars to talk smack about Ace Frehley. and then maybe have like a drunk Ace Frehley in the crowd, like falling over. Like I don't know if you saw that one video where he like kind of fell off the stage. Like if they programmed it to do that kind of stuff, I would probably watch it. It'd be pretty funny, actually. And if you think about it, when these guys are gone, you'd have an eternity of being able to watch that.
No, it's true. And this is so. And there's even more to it than that. When I saw the Kiss Avatar teaser video, they showed Gene with wings and he could fly, and it was kind of like the Kiss meets the Phantom, where they all had powers, that kind of thing. That might be cool for a minute. I might go see that as like I would see a movie. Just like, okay, so one of the things that we might be able to expect from it, and I'm just flying by the seat of my pants on this one, it just occurs to me as we're having this conversation, that they could make like an epic rock adventure combination movie kind of thing that you couldn't possibly do on a live stage with live people.
Yeah, sure.
That might be fun to see.
Yeah.
And be a part of the crowd. And I would prefer that they had a live band back there somewhere actually making the music in real time. There's something about live music. You can tell when it's recorded. You can't.
Yeah.
It's some, I guess I should say, to be fair, some people can. Some people can't. I mean, what are your? I'm curious just to see, because you are you've been doing your podcast, your radio show for what, 25 years, 30 years?
20. It'll be 26 next year.
So you have a lot of experience talking to some real heavy hitters.
Yeah.
You have a great passion for music. You know more music than, I mean, you're kind of like an encyclopedia of it to me. What you know and who you know about, what you know about whom involved, and is always mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on AI and music and all this stuff?
I think, well, the interesting thing that you brought up was the fact that, the next generation may not know a difference.
Right.
Like we know a difference. So for example, the best way to put that is, let's say my grandparents, right?
Mhm.
My grandparents' generation, they were the greatest generation, World War II era, all that stuff. They probably couldn't even conceive the concept of a smartphone, right? Right. They couldn't conceive the concept of anything like that. And, so if you think about it, like you and I have smartphones. I just got a brand new phone, right? I got an iPhone 15 Pro Max, right? But the thing is so fast. There's so much stuff I can do with it. I can record reels with it. I can interact with so many people with it. But back when my grandparents were alive, it wasn't like that. You always had to be face to face. People really didn't talk on the phone that much. You went and physically visited people, and your information, you had to work harder to get it, right? Well, with AI, I think one of two things are going to happen. And we can't predict the future, but there's going to be two things. It's going to take over. And when I say take over, it will be like the main medium for the next generation when it comes to consuming live music. I always discuss that. Who is good? There's an article.
Inevitable, man.
There's an article that came out about Bruce Dickinson talking about, and there's another article I read where promoters are talking about basically crapping their pants, because when all these bigger bands are gone, who's going to sell out and play these big festivals and headline them? And, you might see, I could see Iron Maiden.
You have talked about that, dude.
Yeah. Well,
you and I talked about this.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is there was an article of Bruce Dickinson talking about, corporations taking everything over, et cetera, et cetera. But you could see something like, I could totally see Iron Maiden making a killing off of this, right? Or it may be a fad or a trend, and, old is new again. So where I'm going with that is, people will still use AI to help write songs. It makes it easier. Will it take over? It's hard to say, because there are people out there that nobody thought that vinyl records would come back in the way that they have, right? Nobody thought that, I started shooting film before it became like this huge renaissance, right? And now everybody's doing this, right? For a specific reason. But you could have a whole nother generation that's going to come in and not even know what live music was, and you're going to have avatars, and it's going to go one of two ways.
So let me interject on a couple of things, because you brought up a point that I wanted to make earlier too, when I was thinking about, when you asked me to come on and do this, which, thank you, by the way, I really appreciate it. It's great conversation and it's fun stuff. And it's great too, because it lives in both realms that I live in, playing music as well as being a computer engineer, a network engineer. So first of all, when the electric guitar was introduced, it was really kind of outrageous to people. That a lot of people are going, it'll never stick. This is, it bastardizes the instrument. It changes it. It makes it something that was never meant to be. And then of course the next generation, though, that's all they knew was, you had the Chuck Berry. You remember that Rock Around the Clock, Bill Haley and the Comets? Yeah. That guitar player in that song, if you listen to that guitar solo, it rips, and that was made possible by electrifying. You couldn't get that kind of sustained gain and compression without making an electric.
It's kind of like that scene in Back to the Future where he goes and plays Johnny B. Good and plays that crazy solo.
And everybody's like,
and they start doing all this crazy like Van Halen tapping and stuff, playing on the, he starts doing like, yeah. And, but think about it. So that kind of music back then wasn't really invented yet, but this dude's, back in time playing it in front of people in the 1950s. It looked like you were crazy. It's kind of like, when Metallica first came out, nowadays, if you go and listen to stuff on the radio, you have a lot of bands that have a heavy sound to them. But back then, nobody was playing stuff like that, at least not the way that they were doing it. So, it's like I said, I think it's going to go one of two ways. It's either going to go like we talked about, and sadly, I think that's where it's headed.
I think it is too. Now I wanted to address your comments about vinyl, because actually a few years ago, I think it was in 2009, I was on tour with Circle to Circle, and Circle to Circle had issued it was Delusions of Grandeur on vinyl picture disc, and I have one actually framed on the wall. And Zach was actually kind of astonished at how many of them were sold, based on how many, because their original run was very short. And he was like, "Wow, I can't believe it."
In fact, it was very, very small, because when I ended up buying that.
You have one?
I do have one, yeah. And the thing that was crazy about that is, I remember when I ordered it, the place, I can't remember where I ordered it from, but they said they may not have enough of them. But I ended up getting one. But that was a while back. But yeah, I remember that specifically. And there were bands that would put out limited vinyl releases.
Right.
Right. I remember when I don't remember what album was it. I think it would have been, I think it was 2002. Was it 2003? No, 2006. And 1996, I actually bought, Halloween put out a limited number of Keeper Legacy albums that they put out on vinyl originally. And yeah, it's interesting you say that, but I do have that Delusions of Grandeur thing, and That's totally get it. Yeah.
So my point with that is, you and I discussed this, I think 2 nights ago on Facebook. It was a little back and forth where I was saying that physical media only makes up for, I believe the number was 37 or 40% of total sales.
So if you look at revenue, I believe it's 83% is streaming, and 11% is physical sales.
Physical media of some sort.
Yeah. Now I don't know if that physical, because it gave me it didn't really go into detail. But I'm going to
break it down between CDs or cassette tapes.
But I'm saying I believe it's 11% CD sales. People listen to cassettes, which I think is crazy, but that's bizarre. Out there. And vinyl. And then
vinyl was 2.1% of the total.
But I think vinyl was growing still. Like it was still rising.
It actually, you know where I found the stats? ChatGPT.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You ever use it? It's actually
I've never used it. No.
It's really, again, it's extremely useful for a number of things. It can be entertaining, but it can also be very informative. So you can ask it direct questions like that rather than have to go find it.
Yeah.
And if you tell it to give you the citations from where this information comes, it will give them to you.
Okay.
So just so you know, but yeah, it was when I looked it up the other night, it was 2.1% of total physical sales. Mm-hmm. There are also people. You have a Macintosh amp and you got the Calibri turntable and the whole. Are you the?
I do have a There is a Macintosh here, not in this room, but yeah,
I thought so.
It's the Baogram. I think it's 8800 is a turntable.
Jeez, I mean that's some like real nice hardware. It's from. I got rid of all my physical stuff. I think it's cumbersome and weird. But then we have a friend, Dustin, who has like walls of CD. I mean, you've seen it. His walls of CDs that go to floor to ceiling all the way around him, and he's got so many. It's like thousands of them.
I can tell you that I have the same thing.
Yeah, that's cool. See, I respect it. It's just for me, it's like I need to reduce the clutter. I'm getting rid of all this stuff when I listen to music.
Well, so for me, let me just tell you. So this is what I do. I don't really. I mean, I like vinyl, but it has to be a band I'm really into. Like, it's really hard to like not get an Iron Maiden album on vinyl because I get a big giant thing of Eddie. Right? I mean, it's really hard to do that. If there's bands that I really love, I will get the vinyl. It all depends on the release and what it is. Like I'll give you an example. I got this band I really love. I think it's very, very good, called War Curse. And what they did which I thought was really cool, is people sell different variants, right? They sell like a pink variant, a blue variant, whatever.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
They did recycled vinyl. Basically, it's the same exact thing, but they take this to random colors. You get a random color. You don't know which one you're going to get. Cool. I thought that was actually cool. Mine ended up being gold, but some of them were green, some of them were purple. You just got random. They took whatever was there, kind of melted it together, made the discs out of it, and then they pressed it. And so you didn't know what color you were going to get. That's
cool.
Yeah. So
I can appreciate all of that. I truly can.
Yeah.
There's people collect old cars. People restore old cars. There's something about that genuinity.
Yeah.
That nostalgic bit that will always stick with us. So future generations will go, you know what? I'd really like to see live music. Live music will, of course, continue to exist. But do you remember what was it was a Bruce Willis movie? Oh, The Fifth Element.
Yeah, I remember that.
That crazy singer that they had. All of that music, for example, this is kind of the way I see this going, is that AI generates whatever the music is going to be. And you might have one person who is actually singing, or just one person who is pretending to sing it, but giving such incredible performance artwork that is what becomes, that's what becomes live music, essentially. That's one possibility. But I also think there will always exist, especially when, again, I'll return to the idea of rock and roll, which is it's gritty and it's imprecise.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure AI could also emulate the imprecision of it.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Yeah, it could.
But it's never going to be the same thing twice with a human rock band.
No.
And I can think of some in particular that I'm like I don't know, rock bands like The Strokes. That stuff is so, or even like Greta Van Fleet. It's never going to be the same thing twice. Mm-hmm. It's really kind of gritty and noisy and strange. They use vintage instruments and amps that are really hard to control the gain and the output. You have to be a real master at controlling the guitar and the bass. Yeah. And so there's always going to be some of that, but will it be arena sized anymore? I don't think so. You're going to see it in theaters because most people will find the idea at some point in the future of human beings in a room that big playing with that many instruments to be kind of quaint and strange.
Yeah.
Also, I want to address one more thing you said, and that was the Bruce Dickinson thing. It didn't occur to me. I did an interview with you last year, and I was saying that because you were asking about, what I thought about the future of the music business and what the current state of it was.
Yep.
And I was saying that one of the biggest problems that I think is facing the big festivals of the world is the thing you mentioned. And that is that Iron Maiden is going to not, how much longer do we have them? And a headliner of that size is required to basically get enough people out to Wacken or Rock Hard or Sweden Rock or Download. They have a huge headliner. And when you look at the headliners, they're almost always 30, 40 or 50-year-old bands. So what happens when those bands are no longer around, when they retire, when they die? That's going to happen at some point. So it was my actual prediction that the festivals would also die with them. So the idea that having a headliner that is Iron Maiden's avatars is interesting. Mm-hmm. I hadn't thought of that. That's a very interesting prospect. Could it be enough to keep the festivals alive? I don't know that it could, but maybe it could for a while. As you said, it might actually be an interesting novelty for a while. A trend.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing is my son is 17 and he's obsessed with vinyl records. He'll stream stuff, but he's obsessed. Can you tell
the difference in the way they sound?
He I don't know. He can. He likes the way they sound. It is what it is. But what I'm saying to you, cool. But what I'm telling you is that there was another weird thing I came up with. I just thought of this yesterday. So I posted something about a lot of me being oversaturated with music getting thrown at me that I could probably listen to like maybe 10, 15% of it. Right. At some point, because there are a lot of outlets that cover this kind of music that have significant followings, there is always that possibility that when these headliners are gone and people realize that they are not there, they might look for the next thing. And what I'm saying is, let's say, for example, I'm just going to say Brave Words or Blabbermouth, or they got like 2 million people or whatever they have as following, right? Well, then they're going to be forced to cover other bands that aren't as big. And therefore, that will be out for everybody to see that's into heavy metal. They may pick one of these bands, and one of these bands could catch on and get a significant following. Like Spotify is pretty much almost the sole metric now used to book shows and to determine a band's audience, et cetera, et cetera. It literally is. I mean, a lot of record companies will say no, but that's BS. It actually is. And I have noticed that some bands that are a little bit newer, maybe 10 years old, right, are starting to overtake some of the more legacy act bands as far as listeners go, if you look at the numbers. And
that's not surprising. I bet if we went back to, say, 1970, when we had a generational change from the boomers to the Gen Xers like me, and are you Gen X or younger?
I'm Gen X. Yeah,
you're Gen
late Gen X, but I'm Gen X.
When the new music came out, you had the same fall off. You had bands that have been slugging it out in the clubs for 5 or 10 years and are now starting to pick up. And I think that that's actually natural. I don't know that has anything to do with, Spotify, or I think that's almost natural. But that's just me. I don't know how to analyze that. I don't have enough data. But that's an interesting point, Tony. So. But at this, what do you think? See, my argument with again this mutual friend that we have was that people are still going to want to see Metallica after they retire. And the biggest, most well-organized Metallica tribute band is going to do very well. AC/DC's, the biggest tribute band in the world right now is this AC/DC one. I believe they're called Back in Black out of Texas. They even had a documentary made recently, and it was quite good. Their audiences are huge. They've played stadium shows.
Yeah, we have a Pink Floyd tribute band that is absolutely, I'm not into that band as much, but they're phenomenal. I photographed them, and it's called Wish You Were Here. Okay. Yeah, and they're absolutely, like, if you go and see them, and I believe people that played in Pink Floyd actually like approve of this tribute band. It is absolutely it's crazy, but this whole entire band, I mean, they'll sell out the House of Blues or someplace like that here. I mean, they sell out. I mean, because they put on that good of a show.
Well, this is actually, I think, the largest tribute band in the world.
And then my buddy Sean,
Red Floyd or the Australian Pink Floyd, they play like Red Rocks, and they're great.
And my buddy Sean's band, Four Horsemen, Sean Perry. So for those that listen to my show, Sean was one of the guitar players in a band called Antithesis, right? And I'd never seen the band, but like I've seen videos of them playing, and I mean they are like, it's like spot really on. That could be something that could happen. It's interesting because over the course of next year, this whole AI thing I'm going to be bringing up with a lot of musicians. I brought it up with one musician of an interview that I have not posted yet, but that will be posted up here pretty soon. With a drummer, we were talking about AI, and he brought up graphic artists, getting, basically kind of losing a lot to that. I know a lot of photographers that have a lot less business now, because AI is kind of like made their, like, I know one guy who's a prominent photo, he has a really nice studio in Florida, and he's kind of more gearing himself more towards doing stuff with movies now. And he's doing some photography. He's still doing photography as a main gig, but he's going a different direction for it. These are things that I think that I'm going to be bringing this up with a lot of musicians. I have a lot of really cool, prominent musicians I'm going to be bringing up, and I'm interested to hear what they say, because I have a video coming out. I don't know when I'm going to put it out, but I did. Back like 10, 15 years ago, I started asking musicians, where do you think the music scene is headed, right? Like I would ask them, what do you think about streaming, which is just coming out? What do you think about, we talked about why the industry went down. And amazingly, every one of and these are accomplished people, right? I think like one of the interviews was with Charlie Benante of Anthrax, where he talked about streaming and how that was going to destroy or has really destroyed the music industry. I had Blackie Lawless talking about, and he did it was actually cool when I had him on because he went all the way back to like the 20s talking about how it started and then how it evolved and then what is leading to it, going downhill and everything that he said. And this was like 2010.
Everything's come to pass. He's actually another musical historian. He knows his stuff.
Yeah. So what I'm saying, these are accomplished people. Okay. Yeah. And unfortunately with stuff like this, there is what you want to happen and what is actually going to happen. And a lot of people want to believe that something is not going to happen, and unfortunately that's not reality. I live in reality. I mean, do I want AI to take over music? Absolutely not.
That's where I'm at with it too, Tony. We're in the same spot.
Right.
But so it's like, it's already happened.
Would I want $5 million to just randomly appear outside of my door when I walk outside to go get the mail? Sure. Yeah. Is it going to happen? No. But I think but we can't predict the future because, but a lot of these guys that were really that are really accomplished and have been through the industry, they know where we're headed. And a lot of them, I'm interested to see what people think about AI. And I had one person I interviewed. It was the drummer for Flotsam and Jetsam and Fifth Angels, Ken Mary. Cool dude. We talked about AI. He's the first person I brought it up with, and we talked about that of how that's affecting the music business. We didn't go in real detail, but I don't know how it came up. I think I might have brought it up, and we started talking about it a little bit. But coming up next year, I have some pretty prominent people that are going to come on the show, and that is something I'm bringing up to them. Because
here's the kind of practical side, the technical side of it too. And a lot of people aren't aware of this. I'm sure you are. That, for example, if your phone didn't have access to the internet, there's a lot of things that it cannot do anymore. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of what, like when you play games on your phone, for example, that are particularly high graphic content, the local processor does a lot of processing, but it offloads a ton of that to cloud processors, stuff on the internet that then actually relays it back with very little latency. So your phone becomes super powerful.
Yeah,
your phone gets a lot of its power from the fact that it's constantly connected to a series of cloud systems that do that. This is what we call offline processing, and then it sends that information once it's processed back to your phone, and
while stealing your personal data.
He's either stealing it or you have inadvertently given it permission because nobody reads the terms of service when they agree.
No, not at all. No,
which is my job. I read it whether I like it or not. But my point on this is that because it's so incredibly inexpensive and it's getting cheaper, it's getting more widely available. One of the things that might be interesting is to see, because again, I'm still coming from the standpoint of it still requires a musician to give it enough inputs to create interesting music.
Yeah.
So because one of the things that the internet did, that YouTube did, that home digital audio workstations have done, making it easier to record at home, is that we've gotten this incredible, like you said, you're overwhelmed with you're sent so much music from so many bands. It's hard for you to get involved with all of it sometimes. We have an incredible, there's some really truly amazing artists that we've seen on YouTube and some complete shit. You know what I mean? You get like every version of that because it's now so widely available. I think creating AI music might do something interesting too, because again, it requires inputs. You've got to tell it exactly what you want, which means that you have some sort of creative input with it that we might find some more interesting flavors of music that we haven't heard yet. Some really interesting combinations of stuff that we haven't seen. Yeah. Because again, that offloading power, that internet power that is now so readily available and so super cheap gives us instant processing of really complex ideas, fires it right back at us in real time. That's something that artists of all stripes can benefit by. Well, but it's the performance stuff that I'm most concerned about, frankly.
Well, and here's something interesting. I want to bring up. I had a lot of people that know I'm a singer, right? And I remember playing a gig. I had this pedal. It was called a Digitech Vocalist Live 2. Okay.
I have
And
one.
yeah, exactly. So the Digitech Vocalist Live 2 has a processor in it that can detect what key you are singing in. Right. It can detect if you plug a guitar into it, like say if I'm playing guitar and singing, or if it was somebody who had their guitar plugged into it, it can detect on what they're playing, what key is the song they're playing, and what notes they're playing. And then what I do is I hit a pedal, and I can have up to a 1, 2, 3, or 4-part harmony to my voice and make it sound like there's multiple people. And I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, I don't have it anymore. I sold it. I had no use for it. But I can tell you that it had parameters in there that adapted to your voice, and it made it sound, and it was like legit sounding. Like, I tried it out recording with it one time. I actually took a direct signal from somebody's guitar, and what I did is I plugged it into that and used the output, plugged it into an interface, and I didn't have to sing over, like I didn't have to layer vocals. It did it for me. Sure. It was absolutely crazy. But that thing has been around for over 10 years.
The Digitech Vocalist came out in the 90s.
Yeah, I have a Digitech VX400. Now, what I use that for is I use it to do a lot of like voice modeling for like promos and doing like commercials, things like that. I used to record that kind of stuff here for like, people doing ads on the radio. I'd record them an ad, and I would use that to alter my voice, right? But it can do that. And so this AI thing is not new. I mean, this has been slowly evolving to this point.
Now.
Yeah, it's more sophisticated now, but it's been here for a long time, and it's been slowly evolving.
Well, this is another really good point. So you brought up that we talked about that I play in a Whitesnake tribute. I've also played with, I played with Steve DiGiorgio in a band that we created called Future's End. I've been around for a while doing different things, and I always take it very seriously. Mm-hmm. Everything I do, rather than treating it with anything less than, if I'm going to get involved in it, I want to do 100% on absolutely every little detail. One of those details when I agreed to play in this Whitesnake tribute band was, wow, not only do I have to learn all of John Sykes' stuff to the note, people will sit out there, guitar players, they'll sit out in the audience like this with their visor and a clipboard, writing down what you got wrong. You know what I mean? So it was also very important to me to play note accurate stuff because of my own great admiration for the amazing player and innovator that John Sykes is. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that went along with that, and this directly relates to our conversation, is that one of the things that 1987 record in particular had a very iconic guitar sound that for the last 30 plus years, people have been trying to duplicate in different ways. And it's really, really tough to do. There's a couple of reasons for that. The amps, I actually found out through some channels, some people I know got me in touch with people he knows, and I got to talk to the guy that knew what kind of amps were used to record that and what he was using on the Blue Murder record as well. And they are amplifiers that are so hard to get that I found one. It's actually two that they used on the record in a stereo pair. And the one alone was, I believe it was a 1982 or 83 Mesa Boogie Coliseum with a 3C preamp. And I found one in relatively good condition for $30,000. And that was only half of the rig that I needed to copy this sound. And I also figured that the $30,000 amp includes a divorce built right in. So I wasn't going to do that. So I've been a partner with the good people at Kemper for the past decade, and I love the stuff that they make. It got me real close. I dialed in something I liked, but it still wasn't quite there. So I decided that I use, when I play guitar here in my studio, I use desktop software called Bias FX 2. Mm-hmm. And it is essentially an amp modeling software that also uses AI and machine learning to duplicate the sounds of not just amplifiers, but speakers, cabinets, microphones, pedals, pretty much the whole thing. And they're constantly updating it with new amp models that use AI and machine learning to develop these tones. So I decided I was going to see if I could make it do what I wanted it to do in terms of my John Sykes tone. And I got it. It's so close. I'm never going to get as close, and I don't have the man's hand. So, if I did, then they'd be even closer. But it's as close as I can get. You've heard it. people have seemed to be, some people are on the fence with it, but for me, it's about as close as I've ever heard or close as I've been able to get to. Um, so it is made with a machine learning algorithm. And now how am I going to get that on stage? So what I had to do was actually build a special case for it. And that special case is in the form of anybody who's been to a live show, and most of the musicians are going to be familiar with a floor wedge, a wedge monitor, one with a speaker so you can hear yourself on stage.
Yeah.
Took the speaker out, put a 15-inch touchscreen in it, ripped all the guts out, took the top off, and I built a computer rack inside of it that runs the software. And I put inputs and outputs on it. I use a MIDI foot switch to control it. And this is my live rig. That's what I use to duplicate that live John Sykes sound. And what made me think of it, you were talking about the harmonizer. He also had an Eventide harmonizer that he used on the guitar solo for Is This Love, for example.
Yeah.
And I have that built into my rig. So now I'm able to bring this digital portable AI generated copy of John Sykes's tone with me everywhere I go. So then, he also had other guitar players, and I was like, well, can I create a Bernie Marsden tone? Sure. So I figured out what kind of amps he used. I modeled his sounds, and I put together this thing that sounds like Bernie Marsden's tones. Did the same thing for Steve Vai and Adrian Vandenberg, the other guitar players that recorded with them. And so, again, I think that this plays into the idea that tribute bands are largely going to be who the nostalgic folks, the people that today we would say that buy vinyl, in 20 years are going to want to hear Whitesnake, but they're not going to want to go see a bunch of avatars. So this is where this plays in, is that you're going to have tribute bands that fill that gap. I don't think they're going to be filling up arenas. But like right now, are you familiar with groups like Black Jacket Symphony or Raiding the Rock Vault? These are bands that pay tribute to the entire genre or an entire decade or era. So Black Jacket Symphony, for example, is now on the road, and they're playing, 4,000 or 5,000 seat theaters all around the world, and this country in particular, where they're playing. This last tour, they were doing the entirety of Led Zeppelin 4. And they did it to a precision level that's just astonishing. It's like, wow, that was really great. So they go out every few months with a different tribute that they're going to pay to. So they've done a Heart one. They did the whole Dog and Butterfly album, that kind of stuff. So you're going to see more and more of this, and there are several of them that are doing it. So this is also, again, that argument that the purists really hate hearing this stuff. No, it's going to be replaced by bands that are just as good. I'm going, right now, record labels don't want to invest anything in developing artists to begin with.
No.
And that's when you're a unique band, it's truly unique. And this better than anybody, because of the people that you talk to, how the business used to work versus how now it works.
Back when, I'm going to talk about record labels and how that has changed. So back in 1998, through about the mid 2000s, probably had 25 albums a month, 30 emails a week. You didn't have, and he had multiple publicists pushing an album. So like The Chemical Wedding by Bruce Dickinson, for example, came out on CMC International. They promoted that album quite a bit, even though they decided they didn't want to pay for his tour.
For support, yeah.
And even though he said he'd pay for his tour, they didn't want to promote it. But without any promotion for a tour, they were pushing that album for, I think, like 8 months, right? Now you have 3 times the amount of record labels. Each label has quadruple the roster. And now I'm getting like 50 albums a week, 350 to 400 emails a week. And then, in those emails, a publicist, because a lot of publicists out there and record label people that work for the labels promoting stuff realize how much stuff is out there. They're sending me the same email, 20 times sometimes. Right. And so you just get oversaturated. So what they do, I'm going to talk about this band War Curse. They're on Metal Blade. They are they put out an amazing record. Now, this band does not have a very huge fan base, right? They're not like Testament. They're a thrash band, but they kind of evolved a little past it. They started, everything's more song oriented. They have a song called Power the Powerless, probably one of the most perfectly written songs musically I've ever heard. And all this hype was being generated about the album. Then as soon as the album comes out, a month later, it's like it never came out. Like it's like it never existed.
That's it, man.
And that's because since they have 4 times the amount of bands, they just move right on to the next band, hype up their release, and boom, that comes out 2-3 weeks later. Not, it's just not happening. It's like the album never came out. And that is the trend we are on. And that's why it's hard to, they're not investing in the growth of these artists.
No,
what they are doing is, it's changed. I mean, this has changed the landscape so much. So that's why a lot of these bands, you have a lot of great music that's coming out, believe it or not. It's just not getting
it's not getting heard.
It's not getting heard.
Because it's not being promoted properly, right?
Correct. Well,
there's no like investment, no real care for the band, right?
There's no production budgets. The bands basically foot that themselves, and the labels put it out, and it's a pretty crazy dynamic. So, that is what's hurting original music, and then you put an AI into the equation. You might have a lot of musicians that might give up, and maybe people might say, hey, I want to make my own album. Let's say I like Black Sabbath. I want to make my own new Black Sabbath album. You tell AI what you want, and it makes you 9 songs of what you want.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, at present, that's a little further off, but
that's where but that is where it's headed.
Yeah, it is, and this is again, it has its uses, but just for a little perspective for everybody that's watching or listening, and that is that the previous model, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, is what the record labels were looking for was something very unique. They were looking for something that really stood out, that what it needed were experts to work with the band directly on the ground and develop them into what they knew they could be. This is why we have unique bands like Rush and Metallica. And I mean, even for as many of the 80s cookie cutter-ish hair bands that there were, tell me that 2 of them had a singer that sounded exactly alike that sold more than 100,000 records. They didn't.
No.
So the singers were most specifically very unique because that's really what stood out. Generally you had the fancy guitar player that people liked, but if they had a really unique vocalist and could write songs, record labels would dump a lot of resources into these bands and develop them into Extreme or Warrant, or whether you like the bands or not, that's the way they did it. And tell me there's 2 bands that sound like Warrant that sold 1 million records. There's not. There's just one. And that was the idea. It was the goal. Would they still sign a shitload of other bands? Yeah, they did. And it was generally argued that it was the one big one that finally actually broke through, that they put their resources in, that paid for all the rest of them, that didn't actually get it that far. Generally, the metric was 3 records. The first record, it's like throwing it against the wall to see if it sticks. And it's like, okay, this one stuck. First record, we were able to do more than 100,000, which is nothing. These days, you sell 100,000 records, they'll give you a gold toilet. That's like a huge deal. You sell 100,000 records, you're the biggest rock star in the world. Back then, 100,000 records was considered, for a first record effort, it was like, okay, it's not a total failure. For a second, it's a failure. We're not even going to renew your contract for a fourth. First was like, okay, we know where your audience is now. We know who it is that didn't buy it. We know who it is that did buy it. We know what stations played it and what they didn't. So what's how do we get that up to 500,000 from 100,000? So then they'd bring in the A&R guy, they'd bring in specific producers, image consultants, publicists, as you said, that had specific talents, artists that could create cover art and generate a buzz to specifically mold this band into something that they knew was special to begin with. They had to bring it out. Second record was the big one. Did they hit 500,000 records or get close? If they did, it was like, all right, this third record's going to break you. It's going to sell you 1 million records. So then they bring in even more resources. This all cost a ton of money. I just saw a documentary on Whitesnake, for example, where David Coverdale was in debt to the record label for $3 million in 1983. Before that, 87. And when you think of $3 million in today's money, that's about 12 million bucks. He was going to go bankrupt. Mm-hmm. That 87 record, think of the difference between Slide It In and the way it sounded and its presentation and its songwriting to the 87 record. You can tell that Geffen went, we believe in this, and we're going to put the best people we have on the planet into this to bring that out. And they did. They sold 20 million records.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like if you ever hear the story of how much money Def Leppard dumped into making Hysteria. Have you ever heard about that?
Yeah, because yes,
they
was unprecedented.
They needed to sell like 5 million copies to break
just
even.
To break even, and they did. I mean, the record was huge. I think, doesn't it still have the world's records for the most hits on a rock record? I think it does.
Yeah, it does.
We're close to it. So what's changed is that now what they're looking for are bands that all sound the same. They're not looking for unique bands.
No,
because bands that sound the same are less expensive. You don't have to put nearly the resources into them. So you find a model. Let's call it Nickelback. They've sold 100 million albums, so it's a good model to choose from. So you find things that sound a lot like that, you repackage it, and then put them on tour. Tours are cheap for record labels versus, spending $1 million crafting a record, right? Because tours pay back. So they'll put them on tour, but they also no longer give them the rights to their merch or their images. These are things that bands used to be able to earn or buy. These they call it a 360 deal. All of your publishing, all of your tour support, everything is wrapped up, and that's all record label budget. And if there's any profit in it, it's actually shared with the band in small amounts or whatever. I remember Matt Heafy's dad, who used to manage Trivium, posted a picture of Matt's, and this was after a new release back in, I want to say it was 2011, 2012. Trivium had just, sold it. They did really well. They were out on the road with Dream Theater. They were playing the festivals all over Europe. And he posted a picture of his royalty check, Matt's royalty check, for, I believe it was $17 after all of that. $17. So now what they're doing, they found a formula. Rather than looking for something unique, they're looking for a formula. They repeat it. One band doesn't work out so well, the other one does. They keep that one on tour. They're looking for younger bands that don't have marriages or mortgages or, because as long as they can keep them on the road, they don't need to be paid much. If they don't have apartments and kids and stuff they got to take care of, it's cheap to put them on the road and just, keep churning those things out. And in a lot of cases,
or if they have a job where they don't have to be home for it. Right.
They can work on the road, they're, whatever. This is what they're looking to do. And you can't tell me that quality doesn't suffer from that. Mm-hmm. It does. And you've probably heard that more than anything else. What kills me is that we get a lot, especially in power metal, you get a lot of just clone after clone after clone that's got absolutely nothing more interesting than the last one. The real innovators in that space personally. And there is something very unique and different about what they created. It's like the shirt you're wearing. I'd argue those guys innovated power metal. That's who created it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so I see so much of it. We're saturated with it, and none of them are unique enough to really break out past playing the 500 or 600 or 800 room theaters. They might 800 seat. They might get up to 1,200 or 1,500. At the peak, and they just keep them on the road.
Yeah.
And then when they get home for a little while, they're like, wow, we're broke. How do we eat? How do we make another record? I need guitar strings. This is kind of the state of things these days.
Yeah.
So, and AI is going to make that even less expensive.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to get so cheap that they're not going to be interested. I've heard it argued from friends of ours and people we've talked to about this, that, oh no, some band is going to be so unique that they'll just break through and change everything. I'm like, because that costs money. And when the model gets to the point where they're not spending much, but they're making a lot, why would they spend money on even something that's unique if they don't need it?
Correct. Yes.
That was like the entirety of this discussion to me is where all that ends up. It's going to get so cheap and so easy to do that somebody that's truly unique is going to have to do it on their own. And will they actually get there? That's the question. And what does getting there look like? Headlining a festival where there's 100,000 people out there, I think those days are probably going to be gone. That's where I see all of this stuff going. And it is sad. And a lot of the future generations won't get to know how really exciting that actually all was. It was great. But they will not, because they won't have ever known it. What's replacing it? Will it be any less exciting to them? That's the question.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes sense. Well, hey man, thanks for coming on the show.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Tony. I always love talking to you, man.
It was definitely a fun discussion and a fun little tirade about a fun little powwow about AI, because again, we can think we know where this is headed, but maybe it doesn't. It's a very uncertain future. But
I would like to see, what we might want to do is revisit this conversation a year from now, because things will change. This stuff changes. Just for me to wrap this up from the technical side, if you don't mind, to give me just
not a problem.
And that is that in my profession as a cybersecurity specialist and an analyst, every morning I get up at 4:00, and the first thing I do is read the cybersecurity news that comes from the FBI and from labs and different sources all over the world. The attacks and the types of technologies and techniques that are being used to attack infrastructure and business systems and everything else change so fast that we're generally, the FBI reports that even the most seasoned experts are probably 2 years behind being able to keep up with the way that the threat actors innovate. So that it changes daily. I have to constantly learn new things. And in my profession, I have to be what we call an ethical hacker. If I want to be able to defend a system that I'm putting together against what's possible, I have to learn how to attack it the same way hackers do. So all that being said, is that the AI right now is also being used by hackers. We've all gotten those spam emails that we can recognize that are junk mail and they're bogus because of the bad use of language or in English, or they're trying to pose as a legitimate company and you notice the logo's off. That's not happening nearly as much. AI has made that a hell of a lot more effective than it used to be. So over the course of the next year, I think we'll have a lot of interesting information coming out in terms of, we'll see scandals. This band says they're AI free, that this is all organic. And then we find out that it's not. And then the band's going to have to go out there like Milli Vanilli did and hang their head and admit that basically AI has been writing their music. We're going to see a lot of that in the transition between using human people and live people as artists and musicians and live music to where it's ultimately heading. We're going to see a lot of that. A lot of people are going to get busted with their hands in the AI cookie jar because it's going to be unavoidable. They're going to have to do it just to stay relevant and stay alive. So that's the way I see at least the next year or two playing out. So it'd be interesting to talk to you in a year and see where
a year from now, December, we'll plan it now.
Yeah, let's do it, man.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for coming on, man. And
thanks for having me, dude. I really appreciate it.